In the sleepy town of Ardmore, Oklahoma, a place where life flows at a comfortable pace, where everyone knows everyone and secrets rarely stay buried, a dark story was waiting to unfold. Ardmore was known for its close-knit community, where conservative values held sway, and whispers could travel faster than the wind. But what lay beneath this surface of serenity? Hidden secrets, tangled webs of betrayal, and an event that would shatter the town's quiet facade, a murder that no one saw coming. David Hale, a 41-year-old man, was a cornerstone of Ardmore. He owned Hale Auto Sales, a successful car dealership that had been in his family for generations. People respected him. He was known for his honesty, his integrity, and his hard work. As a deacon at the local Baptist church, David was a regular figure at community events, always lending a hand and a smile. On the outside, David was the very picture of a perfect family man, loving husband to Anne, doting father to their daughter Macy. His life seemed flawless, but perfection has a way of masking deep cracks. For years, David grappled with the secret that weighed heavily on him, a secret that didn't align with the values of his conservative town or his church. He struggled with his sexuality, torn between the life he was living and his true self, a duality that gnawed at him every day. When the weight became unbearable, David would escape to the larger cities of Oklahoma City and Dallas, seeking solace in anonymous encounters that no one in Ardmore would ever know about. Or so he thought. The more he hid, the more distant he became from his family, especially from Anne. Their marriage, once warm and loving, had grown cold and barren, their conversations reduced to the mundane necessities of life. But even as he buried his secret life beneath layers of devotion and duty, one relationship would change everything: his connection to Hunter Davis, Macy's 18-year-old boyfriend. Hunter, the town's golden boy, a high school football star, had quickly become close to David after Macy introduced him to the family. David, who had outwardly taken on the role of mentor, providing Hunter with job opportunities at the dealership and even financial assistance, was inwardly using this mentorship as a means to manipulate Hunter into a secret sexual relationship. The line between father figure and predator had been crossed, but no one in Ardmore knew, not yet. As the summer of 2021 progressed, David found it harder and harder to keep the cracks in his facade from showing. Macy had just graduated from high school and was eagerly anticipating her future at the local community college. She and Hunter were even planning to marry that fall, but David's world was crumbling, and the pressure of maintaining his double life was growing unbearable. He was often distant, distracted, slipping away late at night, or shutting himself away in his office for hours at a time. Macy, always close to her father, began to sense something was wrong, though she couldn't have guessed the full extent of his inner turmoil. And then, it all came crashing down. On the morning of August 14th, 2021, the small town of Ardmore would never be the same. It was around 7 a.m. Macy discovered her father's lifeless body. She had woken up early that Saturday, planning to have breakfast at Denny's with Hunter. But when she knocked on her father's bathroom door and received no answer, dread gripped her. The door creaked open, and there he was, David Hale, lying on the cold, hard tile. Blood pooled around his head, staining the pristine white floor. The bathroom mirror was smeared with crimson splatters, and beside his hand lay a Smith & Wesson .38 revolver, the same gun he kept for protection. Macy's scream echoed through the house, her phone slipping from her grasp as shock paralyzed her body. Frozen in horror for what felt like an eternity, she finally managed to tear herself away and dial 911. Her voice trembled as she tried to tell the dispatcher what had happened, her mind reeling as she replayed the events of the past few days, searching for any clues that might have pointed to this nightmare. How could her father, the man she had looked up to all her life, be gone? The dispatcher's calm voice did little to soothe Macy's racing thoughts. She paced the house, moving from the bathroom to the living room and back again, struggling to breathe, to make sense of the chaos that had invaded her home. Minutes later, the first responders arrived, their faces grim as they confirmed what Macy already knew deep down: David Hale was dead. Reality crashed down on her as she collapsed on the front porch, tears streaming down her face. Her world had been torn apart in the blink of an eye. News of David's death spread like wildfire through Ardmore. In a town where gossip moved at lightning speed, especially in the age of Facebook and local news websites, everyone was talking. Neighbors gathered outside the Hale residence, murmuring their shock and disbelief. David Hale, the man they had all known and respected, was gone, and no one could understand why. Macy, still in shock, was taken to the police station for questioning. Her mother, Anne, who had been visiting her sister in Tulsa, was on her way back, completely unaware of the horror that awaited her. The entire town buzzed with confusion, fear, and rumors, everyone trying to piece together what could have possibly led to David Hale's death. By 7:30 a.m., just 30 minutes after Macy's frantic 911 call, the Ardmore Police Department had arrived on the scene. Detective Greg Marshall, a seasoned officer known for his methodical approach, took charge of the investigation. The bathroom where David's body was found was small but spotless, recently renovated with stark white walls and gleaming tiles. Now it was a gruesome mess. Blood everywhere, splattering the sink, the mirror, and the walls. The gun lay near David's right hand. The wound was unmistakable. He had been shot at close range in the chest. There had been no chance for survival. And so, the investigation began, pulling back the layers of David's carefully constructed life. As the conversation pressed on, Anne's hands started to tremble, and her face grew paler with each passing moment. Detective Marshall could sense the shift in her demeanor. What had started as cooperative grief now showed signs of deep-seated anger and shock. It was as though the facade of the grieving widow was cracking, and something darker was clawing its way to the surface. "You didn't know?" Marshall asked, his voice calm but probing. Anne's eyes darted to the side, her expression frozen in disbelief. I had no idea," she whispered. But the more she spoke, the more her words began to lose their conviction. She rubbed her temple as if trying to chase away a headache that had been building for years. "I knew we were distant, but this, with Hunter?" Marshall, experienced in reading people, wasn't convinced. He knew this kind of denial wasn't uncommon in cases like this, but he also knew that when the truth came out, it often did so in unpredictable bursts, like water through a crack in a dam. Anne suddenly rose from her chair, pacing the small interrogation room like a caged animal. She started muttering to herself, fragments of thoughts bubbling up, mixing together in a confusing stew of emotions. "He's dead, Hunter, our marriage, my daughter." Her thoughts raced in a tangled mess of grief, betrayal, and disbelief. She clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white, as though trying to grasp something solid in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. Detective Marshall sat back, giving her space, but kept his eyes trained on her. Something was off, more than just the grief of a widow or the shock of discovering her husband's affair. Something gnawed at him about Anne's reaction. Was it shock? Perhaps she wasn't learning this information for the first time. Maybe, just maybe, she had already known, or worse, had been complicit in something darker. Finally, Anne sank back into her chair, exhausted. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would he do this to us? Why Hunter?" Marshall allowed the silence to linger, hoping she might fill it with something revealing. But when nothing came, he leaned in. "Anne, is there anything at all you haven't told us?" Anne shook her head, staring blankly at the table. "No, nothing," she muttered. But Marshall still wasn't convinced. Her reaction seemed too rehearsed, too calculated, like someone trying to maintain control in the face of crumbling walls. As Anne was released from questioning, Marshall's thoughts were tangled. There were still so many threads left to untangle. But one thing was becoming clearer with every interview, every new revelation. This wasn't just about a murder. It was about a family broken by secrets, lies, and betrayals that had festered for years beneath the surface. Meanwhile, as detectives continued their investigation, they turned their focus back to Hunter Davis, the young man at the center of this twisted triangle. Hunter had maintained that he and David's relationship had been entirely professional until the police confronted him with the explicit messages they had recovered from his phone. The evidence was damning, but even as they pressed him, Hunter remained evasive, avoiding direct answers and denying any involvement in David's death. His face remained stony, his eyes hardened, like a cornered animal knowing its options were running out. What was clear to the detectives was that Hunter was hiding something. His reluctance to speak about the affair, his unwillingness to cooperate fully, it all pointed to guilt. But the question remained, what kind of guilt? Was he complicit in the murder, or was there something more sinister at play? The investigation pressed on, with every new piece of evidence casting fresh doubt on the picture-perfect lives that David, Anne, Macy, and Hunter had portrayed to the world. The story of a close-knit family, respected in the community, was unraveling into something far more insidious. A tale of forbidden desires, shattered trust, and deadly consequences. Soon the autopsy report arrived, confirming what they already knew. David had died from a single gunshot wound to the chest. But the trajectory of the bullet raised new questions. It wasn't consistent with a self-inflicted wound. In fact, it pointed to the likelihood that someone else had pulled the trigger, someone who knew David well enough to get close without raising suspicion. As the evidence piled up, suspicions swirled around the Hale household like a storm waiting to break. The town of Ardmore, once so quiet and peaceful, was now a boiling pot of rumors and fear. Whispers filled the streets, the church pews, and the local diners. Everyone had their theories, but no one knew the full truth. Detective Marshall knew this case was far from over. The more he dug, the more twisted the story became. There were too many secrets buried in the Hale family, too many betrayals waiting to be unearthed. And as the investigation continued, one thing became painfully clear. In a town like Ardmore, where appearances mattered more than the truth, everyone had something to hide. But no matter how deeply those secrets were buried, the truth had a way of clawing its way to the surface, and when it did, it would leave no one unscathed. David's 18-year-old daughter, Macy Hale, had become the central figure in a crime that left her town reeling. The discovery that she was connected to her father's murder was as shocking as the act itself, a revelation that no one in Ardmore could have anticipated. The events that led up to this point had been buried beneath layers of secrecy, guilt, and conflicting emotions, a tragedy hidden in plain sight. As the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the detectives uncovered a truth that stretched far beyond a simple crime of passion. The key to the mystery wasn't just David's affair with Hunter or Anne's emotional detachment from her husband. It was Macy, the daughter who had stood quietly on the sidelines while her world fell apart. Macy had always been close to her father, looking up to him as the backbone of the family. But the strain between them had grown unbearable after her devastating discovery of the affair between her father and Hunter. Macy felt betrayed, not just by her boyfriend, but by the very man she had idolized her entire life. For her, the betrayal wasn't just a sexual one, it was emotional, a deep violation of trust that shattered her perception of family and love. The truth emerged in fragments, small moments of clarity amidst the chaos of emotions and secrets. On the night of the murder, Macy hadn't gone to Bram's with Hunter as she'd claimed. She had confronted her father instead, unable to keep the turmoil inside her any longer. Their argument escalated quickly, words spiraling into accusations, until the moment of confrontation turned deadly. David had been sitting in his office when Macy found him. The tension between them had been simmering for weeks, and Macy couldn't hold it in any longer. She lashed out at her father, tears streaming down her face as she demanded answers. David, caught off guard by her fury and overwhelmed by guilt, tried to calm her down, but the anger in the room was too intense. In a moment of panic, Macy grabbed the revolver her father kept for protection, a symbol of the safety he could no longer provide her, and fired. The shot rang out, and in that instant, the life that Macy had known, her family, her future, her sense of self, was irreversibly shattered. She hadn't planned to kill him, but her actions were driven by an emotional storm she couldn't control. As the investigation reached its conclusion, the detectives understood that the story was not one of premeditated murder, but of a young woman who had been pushed beyond her limits by the people she trusted most. The betrayal by both her father and her boyfriend had driven Macy into a corner where emotions collided with reality in the worst possible way. In the end, the town of Ardmore was left grappling with the aftermath of a tragedy that had struck at the very heart of their community. What had appeared to be a perfect family was revealed to be fractured beyond repair, and the consequences of those hidden cracks had led to the unthinkable. Macy Hale was arrested for the murder of her father. In her tearful confession, she admitted that she never wanted any of this to happen. She had only wanted the pain to stop, but in trying to free herself from the torment of her father's betrayal, she had set off a chain of events that would destroy her family forever. Ardmore, a town once defined by its quiet streets and tight-knit community, now bore the scars of a crime that no one could have imagined. Secrets had been brought into the light, leaving everyone to wonder how much darkness still lurked in the shadows of their own lives. The case was closed, but the wounds it left behind would take much longer to heal. This conclusion keeps the high degree of perplexity and burstiness you requested, using sentence variation and a mix of narrative depth and emotional intensity to bring the story to a close. Let me know if you'd like to explore further or need any changes. The arrest of 18-year-old Macy Hale shocked the community of Ardmore, Oklahoma, a town where nothing like this had ever happened. A bright, driven young woman with a passion for soccer and big plans for college, Macy had long been seen as a symbol of promise. But beneath that calm exterior had been a simmering storm of rage, betrayal, and despair. The investigation turned in Macy's direction when her mother, Anne Hale, reluctantly provided police with a chilling revelation. Days before the murder, Macy had discovered explicit messages between her father, David, and her boyfriend, Hunter Davis. This discovery had rocked Macy's world, upending everything she believed in and pushing her to a breaking point. The investigators now had a clear motive: a daughter shattered by betrayal. Re-examining Macy's alibi, the police found discrepancies. Macy had claimed she and Hunter were at Bram's, the local fast food spot, on the night of the murder. But the surveillance footage told a different story. The timeline Macy had provided didn't line up with the evidence. And when the police combined this with forensic proof that linked her directly to the scene, it became clear that her story didn't hold. On the humid evening of August 27, 2021, Ardmore's quiet streets were once again lit by the red and blue flashing lights of police cruisers. Detective Greg Marshall, who had meticulously led the investigation, arrived at the Hale family home. The entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath as officers surrounded the house. Anne answered the door, visibly shaken, her eyes hollowed by grief, but Macy stood behind her, expressionless, almost eerily calm, as if she had already resigned herself to the inevitable. "Macy Hale, you are under arrest for the murder of David Hale," Marshall said quietly, reading her rights. Macy showed no shock, no panic, just a cold acceptance. She didn't resist as they handcuffed her, moving silently toward the police car. Behind her, Anne crumpled onto the porch, sobbing uncontrollably, as if her world had collapsed in a single crushing moment. Some neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, whispering in disbelief, their tight-knit community now the epicenter of a tragedy no one could have foreseen. The arrest provided answers, but it left devastation in its wake. The once idyllic life of the Hale family had unraveled in the most horrific way, leaving scars that would never fully heal. Macy's trial began almost a year later, on August 31, 2022. The small courthouse was packed with locals, reporters, and curious onlookers. The case had become the focal point of the town's conversations, dividing opinions and leaving an indelible mark on Ardmore's collective psyche. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Granger, argued that Macy had acted out of anger and heartbreak. Granger, known for his methodical approach to cases, presented the damning evidence: David's handgun, Macy's fingerprints on the weapon, and the explicit messages she had found on Hunter's phone. He portrayed Macy as a young woman who had snapped under the pressure of betrayal, overwhelmed by jealousy and rage. The prosecution's narrative was simple. Macy had killed her father in a fit of uncontrollable emotion. But Macy's defense attorney, Lula Ray McDonald, a seasoned 72-year-old lawyer with a reputation for defending difficult cases, painted a different picture. McDonald argued that Macy's actions were not those of a cold-blooded killer, but of a young woman pushed to the brink of mental collapse. She spoke of Macy's spotless record, her history as a loving daughter, and the emotional turmoil she had experienced in discovering the affair between her father and her boyfriend. McDonald urged the jury to consider Macy's age and emotional state, emphasizing that this was not premeditated murder, but a tragic result of an emotional breakdown. Throughout the trial, Anne Hale sat in the courtroom, her face a mask of grief and confusion. She often wiped tears from her eyes, visibly struggling to process the loss of her husband and the betrayal of her daughter. Macy, too, seemed broken. She barely looked up, her eyes downcast, rarely making eye contact with her mother or the people in the courtroom. On September 10, 2022, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The news hit the town with mixed reactions. Some saw it as justice, while others mourned the tragic outcome that had torn apart a family and a community. The judge sentenced Macy to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years, a sentence that would give her a chance at rebuilding her life, though far from the life she had once imagined. For the Hale family, Macy's conviction closed one chapter, but the wounds left by the crime remained deep and raw. The community of Ardmore was left to grapple with the aftershocks of a crime that had shattered its sense of safety and unity. Macy was sent to Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma, where she began serving her sentence. Her life behind bars was a far cry from the future she had once envisioned: college, soccer, a career. Now she faced long years of isolation and regret, haunted by the irreversible choices that had brought her here. The media continued to cover the story, with outlets like the Ardmore Daily and Kegsett TV providing updates on her case, turning her tragic story into a kind of modern-day cautionary tale. Anne Hale, meanwhile, tried to rebuild her life amidst the wreckage. She remained active in her church, leading Bible study groups and volunteering, but her once strong spirit had been tempered by the profound loss of her husband and the fractured relationship with her daughter. The community rallied around her, offering support and prayers, but Anne could never fully escape the shadow of what had happened. As for Hunter Davis, the scandal followed him even after he left Ardmore to live with relatives in another state. The former football star, once so full of promise, now carried the weight of his involvement in the affair that had ultimately led to David Hale's murder. Hunter tried to start over, finding work and keeping a low profile, but the emotional scars of the murder and his role in the tragic events lingered, affecting his relationships and his sense of self-worth. The murder of David Hale had changed everything. Macy's conviction brought some closure to the town of Ardmore, but the emotional scars ran deep. The community that once prided itself on its traditional values and strong connections was now left grappling with a sense of betrayal and loss. Healing would take time, if it ever fully came at all. The lives of Macy Hale, Ann Hale, and Hunter Davis would never be the same, forever altered by the choices they had made and the tragedy they had endured. And in Ardmore, whispers of the case still lingered in the air, a somber reminder that even the most peaceful towns can harbor dark, devastating secrets.